You spend a lot of time in psychometric assessments. How do you see transformation?
I take a more measured approach to transformation as using it to solve specific problems.
What do you mean by measure approach?
John Bauer is a multifaceted professional. He's not just a personal trainer and leadership coach, he's also a certified cognitive behavior therapist. His passion lies in helping individuals unlock their full potential holistically, emphasizing a healthy lifestyle and mental well-being.
Transformation always carries a personal cost. It may be painful.
I often hear that it's not easy to know what we want.
That's true. I grew up being told, oh, you can't have that, you can't have this, you'll never do this, with limitation. And a lot of my life has been dismantling those perceptions.
How do you see entrepreneurship? Is entrepreneurship for everyone?
Absolutely not.
Someone once said to me, aim for the moon, and even if I don't make it, I might end up amongst the stars. 4.5 years ago, I got stuck. I made it my mission to spread positivity and help 1 million people to think differently. If you also believe that our world needs more positive energy, please join us on the journey. I'm Aaron Pang, and this is a Transformative Purpose.
Welcome, John.
Thank you, Aaron. Real pleasure to be here.
Likewise, I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I'm going to kick off our conversation by learning from you. You spend a lot of time in psychometric assessments. How do you see transformation?
I see transformation as an inside-out process, which largely requires you to change your perception about yourself, to access resources that you already had, but you weren't able to use because you couldn't see them. So I know some people can get addicted to transformation, um, and it's a very exhilarating experience to have. Um, but I take a more measured approach to transformation as using it to solve specific problems.
What do you mean?
It's not an end in itself, it's a tool with which to solve problems.
What do you mean by measure approach?
I use it when I need to overcome a challenge. It's one of the tools in a series of options that you draw on. It's a part of the toolkit. Because transformation always carries a personal cost, you have to let something go. It may be painful, let's be fair, as well as being exhilarating and opening doors to new things. Um, my experience of transformation is it's not something I want to do every day. If I'm moving towards my goal, and the pace that I'm moving towards that goal is comfortable and acceptable, I'm very complacent. I'm happy to continue. I'm not searching for that extra buzz. Um, I'm like to appreciate the good things in life, smell the roses, admire what's happening. If we get stuck, then I'll strap on the weapons.
Would you rather be complacent or would you rather be chasing the buzz?
You know, half of me hankers for, and maybe this may be my makeup, that I'm always quite a driven person. I've always been pushing myself hard, expecting a lot from myself. And that's something I can say because of transformations that I've been through, which have made it very clear that that's my personality. Um, so for me, if I go to a Chinese doctor, he's going to say, too much fire, need to be more water, calm down. That's my life. For me, it's more about calming down and relaxing. And I'm actually doing some work with a chiropractic doctor who has an interesting approach. And I'm learning from him, relearning from him the skills of relaxation and how to put them into practice. And so for me, and this is not about everybody, but for me, I've got enough excitement without going looking for it. But in those moments where I can see that there's an obstacle, then big obstacles need superpowers.
Hmm. Hmm. And what is your advice to other people, to the listeners, to develop their superpowers?
Probably the single most useful piece of advice I've ever received was from Dr. Harrison, who made the Harrison Assessments questionnaire, um, is to think in terms of usefulness rather than in terms of good or bad, because usefulness is a measure which is objective and concrete. What does that mean in terms of transformation? What does that mean as why is that useful? Well, when you have decided what you want, and that's a process of discovery that goes inside you, you then have to figure out what to do to get what you want. And that's a series of choices, it's a series of skills to learn, it's a series of value judgments sometimes. And as soon as you have a direction like that, then you start taking actions, and the value of an action is its usefulness in moving you to your goal. Right? So transformation is a very useful tool when you're getting in your own way. Right? If someone else is getting in your way, there may be other paths, other tools which are more useful. Or if the weather is getting in the way, maybe transformation is not where you go looking. You're not going to go meditating in a cave because it's raining. You then get an umbrella.
I often hear that it's not easy to know what we want, or we think we know what we wanted, and we pursue it, we chase it, and then when we get it, we realize that it's not the thing we wanted.
That's true. Again, another piece of guidance from Dr. Harrison is I once went to him and said, what's the difference between a want and a need? Because I perceived a difference between a want and a need. And I grew up being told, oh, you can't have that, you can't have this, you'll never do this, with limitations from school, limitations from teachers, from parents, from their paradigm. And a lot of my life has been dismantling those perceptions about what we can't do. That's perhaps the level one of transformation, is to figure out that, yeah, you are actually allowed to want things. Another mentor I want to acknowledge was a guy who wrote a book on writing CVs called Max Eggert, Perfect CV. And I went to see him for a session. And he said to me, after doing his evaluation, he said, John, you're going to be very successful. I wasn't expecting that. I didn't ask him how successful I'm going to be, but I couldn't let that lie. I said, justify it. Why do you say that? And he said, actually, John, it's quite simple. It's because you know what you want. Most people, 9 out of 10 people, don't know what they want. And out of the 1 in 10 people who do know what they want, 9 out of 10 are not willing to pay the price. So out of 100 people, you're the only person who's willing to pay the price, and you know what you want, and you'll go after it. So there's no competition because 99 people aren't going to be competing. So the secret of success is know what you want, pay the price.
Know what you want and pay the price. So what do you want now, John? Is what you want now same as what you have wanted before, or has that evolved and changed?
It's greatly evolved and changed. Subject to underlying core, I can say that what I'm doing now is a reflection of what I want. What I'm doing now is working as a personal trainer, which seems like a big demotion from being an entrepreneur and a business starter. And I was at that time the most successful distributor of Harrison assessments in Asia and the second most successful in the world. So been there, done it. That's evidence of my transformation, which happened before. But I've moved on from working on the mind because I realized that a strong mind requires a strong body. If we don't look after the vessel of the body, then the mind is undermined by the vessel that it's in, just as the water needs to be held in a cup. So in personal training, I help people fix so many problems in their lives just by showing them how to look after their muscles and giving them the hope and the optimism and the enjoyment of the process of building themselves up. And then they can take that extra energy, that extra confidence, that extra health, that extra mobility, all of that, then they can apply against their challenges, which they face because of the goals that they've chosen.
So in your world, you have done the psychometric assessments, the connection with the mind. Now you're a personal trainer, you're working with clients on the body. Which one is more important? Which one should people develop first? If you were to choose.
We have a hierarchy of needs, and you have to deal with your place in the economy first. You have to make a living first. You have to provide for yourself. You have to provide for your dependents. And if you have a lot of dependents, I'm sorry, that's a bigger target. You may have to transform more
I feel like you're talking
to be
about
able
me
to do
now.
this. I'm talking my own story, not pointing any fingers here. And it is advice that I was given, this time by Ava Harrison, who is an extraordinary person. She's Dan Harrison's wife and creative partner. And the first thing she said to me was, John, look after your family, make some money first. Everything else will follow after that. So when you've got those boxes ticked, then there's a really interesting piece of work by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was one of the founders of positive psychology. And he discovered and described the principle that we call flow. And the interesting thing about flow is that it comes about when, this is the short version, it comes about when the challenge that we face is equal to the capability that we have. If the challenge that we face, and this is starting to answer your question about what should we do and where am I on my journey? If the challenge that we face is less than the capability that we have, we experience boredom, we experience lowering of energy, lowering of interest, and decay. Conversely, if the challenge that we experience is greater than our capability, that's what a lot of people's life is about, unfortunately. That's associated with stress, burnout, self-doubt, and failure. The experience of disappointment and the cascade of dopamine reduction, endorphins, and things like that that comes with not being able to meet the challenge. But you've got this golden zone in between the two. So this is a principle that I use in coaching, which is to look for how do we match the capability to the challenge, and how do we manage the challenge to the capability. Sometimes, and you see this cropping up over and over again, because in coaching principles, again, if you're not making progress to your goal, reduce the goal, reduce the goal. You maintain your longer term goal, but you start sending shorter term goals, which are incremental. And then you see people accelerate up their performance curve. But it's all about matching that to the extent that you can choose the challenge that you're facing. You want to be choosing a challenge that matches your current capability.
But would you say if someone were to stay in that zone for too long, where we equate challenges with capability, is that when people feel complacent?
Great question. Here's the thing, if you use the model, as soon as you start to feel complacent, that is a sure sign that you haven't taken off a big enough challenge. So that's a time for you to say, okay, I've got this licked. What's the next step? What's bigger? What's more challenging? And make sure it's a little bit incremental rather than a huge jump.
Yeah.
So this principle shows up obviously in weight training, but it also shows up in careers. It also shows up in family life. And if we're working through a recession, it's quite likely that most people listening to this will be facing some kind of financial distress. This is a time to reevaluate the financial challenges you've got and try to reduce those to the level that you can match them with the resources you have today. But as soon as you're in the zone, every success that you have then becomes the foundation for what you learn next. And you just go on up and up and up. There is no apparent limit to how powerful we can be. There's no apparent limit to how much we can learn and grow, as long as we stay in that zone, which is the zone of flow, the zone of empowerment, the zone of enjoyment. And I totally recognize and acknowledge that for some people, for some of their life, that may actually be the zone of ongoing transformation, personal reflection and transformation. All I'm saying is that any principle, when it's taken to a limit, starts to become its own undoing until you've established balance.
I have an inspirational quote. I kind of want to throw it at you and see um, how you actually feel about this. Someone once said, shoot for the moon,
Mm,
and even if you fail, you might still end up amongst the stars,
mm.
right?
Yeah,
How do you feel about this? Is that a good advice?
it is absolutely, for multiple reasons. One is because in the short term, here's why it's important advice. Okay. It's because the human mind cannot calculate exponential growth. It cannot calculate compound interest. So today we have no idea how fast we can go after we've learned the next challenge. So all of our projections and predictions about where we're going to be and what we can achieve and what's reasonable,
Mm.
what's this idea of a measurable, achievable goal, a SMART goal, is actually way too conservative because it doesn't take into account what we're about to learn, right? Now, in the short term, most people's experience is you set a goal and you fail to achieve it. So in the short term, if you're setting a quarterly sales target, or if you're trying to, pace out your studies towards writing a thesis or whatever it is, in the short term, you're going to experience frustration because we tend to underperform for our goals. So shooting for the moon in that context means you're going to miss the moon, right? But as soon as you go longer term, and the tipping point, I think, is around 3 to 5 years. Certainly, if you look at people who set 10-year goals, they way overachieve what they ever believed that they could do. Certainly true for myself in terms of what I've achieved. I mean, I can give you specifics, but as I'd say, if you set goals which are 5 years out, you'll probably overachieve them. In that sense, shooting for the moon is giving yourself permission to be bold and aggressive and to dream of something that you think is impossible. In which case, you're going to hit the moon, but the moon will be a stepping stone.
Beautiful. I love how you interpret it. You've done the entrepreneurship
Yeah,
journey, very successful. Became one of the largest resellers for a major psychometric assessment
yeah,
in the world. And he also talked about the finding our place in the economy, right? Look after our family first. Look after the financials first. How do you see entrepreneurship? Is entrepreneurship for everyone?
absolutely not. Okay. And I can cite the case of when I was starting my business, I was knocking on doors, cold calling, and meeting people. One of the people I had the privilege to meet was the senior VP of human resources for Citibank. I mean, there is, in his career path, there probably isn't a bigger, more powerful position than him. And he met with me and my colleague, and we would start chatting. And it became clear that he got this role after he had sold his own human resources business. So he's talking about running his business before he came into this position. That's an example of somebody who was a successful entrepreneur, did run a business for 10 years, employed people, and did all the good things that a business does. It paid their salaries, paid their families' school fees, and gave them all the fulfillment and growth and everything that an employer does. But he closed it because it wasn't for him. And he decided to go back into corporate life and take everything that he'd learned and become a senior position in corporate life. And the evidence that he enjoyed it was right there on the floor. He had the cliched putting strip with a putter and a golf ball. So, to relax, that's what he was doing in his office. So, no, it's not for everybody, and it's not for all the time. But for those who have the appetite, another of my friends started a company straight out of college. That was his birthday present on graduation. It was a company. His mother paid for the registration of his company.
Wow.
And that's what he's been doing for 40 years ever since. So for some people, it is right.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to have a particular set of skills and a set of aptitudes.
Mm.
We can be valuable being who we are, and that may not be the skills required for entrepreneurship.
Mm. Mm. At the start of the conversation, you mentioned about justify what we want, but be ready to pay our price.
Mm, yeah.
How do you How do you define price? Is it price to yourself or price to people around you or price to the world?
It's a price of something you have to give up. Okay. If I've just bought myself a nice attachment for my viola, piezo pickup, that cost money. It was a small price. But then when I stand up on stage and play the viola in a jazz club, then I have to pay the price of pride and humility. And that's harder than handing over cash. In order to complete the cycle of building my business, I had to also look inside and give up the dreams that I had for growing the company because I recognized that the price there of the compromises I would have to make to grow the company, I would prefer to put that effort somewhere else. And that's why I stopped doing the psychometric assessments and why now I'm doing what I'm doing.
But if we go along this thinking, right, if everyone just thinks about what they want and be ready to pay their price, it doesn't really get people to work together, does it?
Sometimes the price is collaboration.
Hmm.
At its core, the price that you pay for a result that you want is probably going to be some kind of internal change, a change in your perceptions, a change in your methods and skills, a change in your priorities, a change in. Here's the thing about goals. Sometimes you work towards a goal, and you describe the situation that you get something and it wasn't what you wanted after all. I like to think that that's because it was in the way of something else, right? So when I started my company in 2003, I thought it was because I wanted to have a company. I then later sold it because I realized that what I really wanted to do was not have a company, but serve people and make a difference. And there are other ways to do that.
Hmm.
So having had that experience, I'm very happy to have received the goal that I was working towards. But then I was happy to let it go because I realized that, okay, this was pointing me towards something else.
I want to ask you on two things. I'll start with the first one first. With goals, do you think with life it's important to have a goal?
I'll answer that very simply by citing evidence-based research. There's a study that was carried out by Harvard University following people through their lifespan. Part of this study, they questioned the graduating class, show of hands or questionnaire. One of the questions they asked was how many people have written goals, not just have goals, but have written goals. Only about 10% of the class had written goals. As part of the study, they then followed up how they were doing with various different measures. And the interesting observation about goals is that the 10% of the class that had written goals when they graduated, their net worth 10 years later was more than the entire rest of the class. Are written goals important? Yes, they are.
Are they happier though, you think? Are they more fulfilled?
They will be happy to the extent that they're in flow. It's possible to be rich and successful, apparently, and powerful and have influence and be very unhappy. You don't have to look very far on YouTube to find people like that, right? It's also possible to be poor and modest and be very happy. The distinguishing factor is not how much money is in your bank account or how many Ferraris you drive. The distinguishing factor is, are you in that zone where you're taking on challenges and applying your expertise to it? This is what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is teaching us, which is that the joy of life is to express your ability as it is today. So we can see this in Michael Jordan when he was sprinting. He dedicated his life to going to the Olympics and he got a gold medal. A gold medal. Now, a lot of athletes, when they get the Olympic gold medal, they retire and they never do anything again, or they don't pursue professional sports. For him, he went back and next time he got 3, and then he went back again, next time he got 5, whatever the numbers are. So that's a really good example of someone who's continuing to stay in the flow by doing the same profession. And you see it also in Andre Agassi in tennis and so on. And where instead of getting one Grand Slam, he gets all the Grand Slams. There's always a bigger goal. So you can be very happy by pursuing a bigger goal and a bigger goal and a bigger goal. And to the extent that you've got your life in balance, it all works well.
You quoted one of my favorite sports players. I grew up watching.
I love Agassi.
Sorry, I was referring to Michael Jordan.
Okay. Yeah.
My favorite tennis player is Roger Federer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Psychometric assessment. I want to ask you a question related to that. Labeling.
Labeling.
What is your take on labels? Does label help with transformation or does it inhibit?
I would go so far, here's the short answer, and we can talk about it in more detail. I would go so far as to say that identifying and dismantling the labels that you're currently using is an essential foundational step in beginning a transformation.
Mm.
Um,
This,
the
sorry,
labels that we use for ourselves, which have usually been given to us, but sometimes we have given to ourselves, they're necessary at the time that we pick them up because they simplify life. But they simplify life by aggregating patterns together. And whenever you aggregate a pattern, you bring with it a lot of baggage, which it shouldn't actually be there. So the issue with labels is that you believe that it's true and it can't be different. And when you buy into a label, you also buy into all the limitations that comes with it. So I have much more, so I've come to this understanding again because it's part of the Harrison Assessment's design, which is to communicate self-discovery without using labels, and it's much more effective as a result.
and how does somebody dismantle labels?
It's very easy. You find the black swan, the white crow.
Hmm.
Yeah. So as soon as your mind accepts, is confronted by, and is able to see the evidence that the label doesn't apply, you lose the label.
Hmm.
Now, the reality is the mind uses labels, you're going to replace it with a new one, or
Hmm.
maybe with two new ones. But that's how it works. Then your job is to confront those labels to the
Hmm.
extent that they're getting in your way.
Hmm. Could you give us an example? Is the same as someone had a negative thought and they try to reframe it with, two positive words? Like how does someone apply?
Well, I mean, the sort of labels that people carry around is that you're ugly or you're stupid
I feel like this is getting personal now.
or well, isn't it true? It doesn't take long to find something that we can all relate to,
Hmm.
because those are the labels that we've been handed down,
Hmm.
through generation unto generation. These are the chains that we need to dismantle,
Hmm.
right?
What were the worst label you had received from someone?
The worst label I want is one I gave myself,
And what was that?
and I struggled with it for 25 years. So it's quite a good transformation story. It was a label for inadequacy and unpreparedness, as a result of which my success formula was to wait until a deadline was so close that I began to feel stressed and be afraid of it failing. And then I would use that fear of failure as a fuel to burst through in a huge effort at the last minute. I'm not the only one. I know other people work like that.
Is that procrastination?
What's more interesting, again, that procrastination is a label. Good example, thank you. It stops our understanding. What's more interesting is just how it came about and why it worked. And it also shows that it was a useful label to a degree, but it then became its own undoing and it became harmful. What happened is that I continued this pattern of working for years and years. And this is where you start to see that you can face life in whatever messed up way you happen to choose, because I got very good at doing things at the last minute. And I achieved great things by being able to do things. And I became a very good crisis manager. When everything was going wrong and nobody knew what to do, I was the person to call. So I started working as a freelance consultant doing project management, fixing failed projects, because I was totally comfortable with facing impossible deadlines at short notice and marshaling people with the necessary optimism and energy to break through problems and challenges. It was working for me, but it cost.
Mm.
Adrenaline, stress, cortisol, my body was starting to break down. I was beginning to um, pay the price. By the age of 30, 35, I was paying the price for this style of work. The interesting thing was that I was unable to stop it, and I directly addressed the symptom, which was I was studying stress management, I did mindfulness, I did breathing techniques, I did yoga, I did all sorts of different things to try to deal with the stress that was resulting. And I had no idea why every time I would go back to the same pattern. So that's a sure sign of an underlying structure in your thoughts and your perceptions, which is driving your patterns. And it wasn't until I went through a personal development workshop, which had me contemplating success and my abilities, and I got some coaching from that. After the course finished, my friend took me for dinner. We were enjoying wonderful meal and connection, human connection, another important word. And halfway through the meal, I had this experience which is best described and characterized as a cold volcano rushing up my spine, out through the top of my head. It's like the pictures you might see in Eastern art of enlightenment. I'm not going to call it an enlightenment experience, but it was highly energetic. And behind this bubble, which knocked my breath out, I gasped for air. It's like the curtains parted. And I had a flashback to at the age of 15, standing outside the door of an O-level exam room for English. And the memory now had complete clarity of all the modalities, the smells, the temperature, the vibrant colors, the voices of my classmates talking to each other, excited, and me feeling incredibly stressed. Because for years I had had my mother helping me to write essays. I felt so uncomfortable about my ability to write essays that my mother would help me. Effectively, she became an enabler, reinforcing my insecurity about writing essays. But here I am, going into an exam room, which is important to get a good result, and I knew I didn't know how to write an essay, and I would have to write an essay on my own in the next 90 minutes. And went in, did the exam, came out, and actually felt quite confident. And the analysis that my mind came up with was that it was the fear of failure resulting in a flood of adrenaline, which had driven me to produce a good essay. And I literally decided for myself that going forward, anytime I felt anxious about achieving a goal that I wanted to achieve, I would use fear of failure as my fuel. What a stupid decision to make. And the irony is, one of the teachers I shared this analysis with, he was our science teacher for biology, he actually looked at me and said, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I kind of wish he would have explained to me in more detail why it was a bad idea, but he didn't. That's life. Our childhood sucks. It's up to us to fix it. So the really interesting thing is that for 25 years, I could not remember that I made the decision.
Mm.
And yet it was driving my life.
So you were on autopilot.
I was on autopilot. We are always on autopilot,
Mm. Mm.
right?
What was the catalyst at that dinner party that triggered this flashback? Was it something you smelled, something you saw, or was it a conversation?
Here's the way the subconscious works. It works on autopilot. You delegate to it and it does what you ask it to do. In this case, I had asked it to produce stress, and it produced stress. The understanding that I want to bring to this experience is that I no longer needed that coping mechanism. And your subconscious will not release a coping mechanism until after it has developed a replacement. So, like I said, you couldn't go back and say, well, this course is the solution for everybody. Everybody should do this course. No, that's not the message. Because any one of the interventions I tried might have worked, but they didn't. And maybe that one would not have worked, but for the fact that I'd reached a stage where I was ready to change, ready to receive the transformation. Of course, I'm extremely grateful to the friend who introduced me and all of the coincidences that led me up to that point. But one of the keys to transformation is to have a clear goal and to keep working towards it, taking objective measures of your success and failure towards the goal, because that's what really tells your subconscious, okay, we need to develop this new skill here. And maybe this one isn't working for us anymore. So having a goal, this is one of the powerful things about having a goal and having a written goal, is that it makes your growth objectively useful.
I've recently written mine, which is to build a global platform to share inspiration and ideas, and I want to impact 1 million people. I don't know whether I'll achieve it,
You will.
but I have it there to remind me we are building something bigger than us,
Yeah, that's super important.
and we need to be relevant to other people.
Yeah.
Hence having this conversation with you.
Yeah, I mean, my kids have grown up, so now I need to answer the question, what am I going to do next? And if I coach myself using my own philosophy, it's to do something even bigger,
Hmm.
right?
Not for us, for the next
Right?
generation.
So that's, well, whatever it looks like. For me, it has a lot to do with connection and transforming one person's life at a time.
Hmm. Human connection. I want to talk about this.
Hmm.
Let's talk about technology.
Hmm.
I spend quite a fair bit of time in technology. I was born in the 80s. My first 10 years was the analog days. Things were slower. There were more human connection. I spent a lot more time playing sports. We've seen a lot of advancement in technologies in the last 10 years, 10, 15 years, ever since we've had the internet. How do you see technology and how can people use technologies with better intention when the tech companies are not doing their job?
I was born in middle of the 60s. What that meant is that I was at school when the microcomputer was invented. And I grew up with microcomputers. We had a teacher at school that bought all the latest gear, would assemble it, and then he'd get bored and he'd leave it to us to play with. So I was playing with all of the latest gadgets.
Mm.
Apple, Microsoft, I grew up with those. So I've seen modern technology firsthand, went from coding with punch tape
Mm.
up to AI and ChatGPT. I kind of, uh, I claim to understand deeply. What I have seen is that, like any tool, like a sword, the sword can be used to save life or to take life. Technology is a thing. It's not good or bad. It's useful or it's not useful, depending on how you use it. The primary impact on human experience of technology is to accelerate it. It makes it faster. It makes communication faster. It makes growth faster. I am so enjoying YouTube and so enjoying watching children learn stuff on YouTube. It is amazing the quality of the material that they get exposed to and get, whether it's subatomic particle physics, quantum physics, whether it's learning the latest AI tools, whether it's figuring out to use Airbnb and make a living for themselves. There's so much richness there. Yes, of course, you have destructive stuff there as well. You have TikTok, you have the rise in depression, but I think the underlying negatives were there all along. All that's happened, I think, is that technology has amplified it and accelerated it. So my solution to that problem is the same answers. Let's accelerate transformation. Let's accelerate learning and growth, because the way that we deal with challenges and difficulties is to learn and grow. And I think your vision is not an accident, because your vision to do an app which helps people to discover the personal transformation tools that they need when they need it, is all part of the same picture. Yeah. Every hero needs an anti-hero, right? Spider-Man needs Doc Ock.
Yeah.
Batman
A
needs
villain.
Penguin. Everyone needs a villain.
Mm.
So technology is the villain. The superhero needs to come into its place.
Mm.
Neo is there waiting, and Neo will be there,
Mm.
because that's how humans respond to technology. We
Mm.
respond to the environment.
Mm.
In this case, it's technology.
Mm. I love how you put it. And thanks for calling me a superhero, and thanks for being my ally, and being my second superhero. I guess I spend a lot of time in the tech industry, in the digital industry, and what pains me the most, and when I step outside from it, is that I benefited a lot just from tuning off a lot of the distractions. Um, and I'm s- and I said that the tech companies aren't doing their job in the sense that they aren't putting in place the right governance to guide people to use technologies with intentions. An example would be social media companies would hire social engineers, and they will put in place features to get people hooked so they can spend more time on the phone, right? The longer they spend, the more ads they will see, the more revenue they get, and the better the results.
It's just a choice that people have to make. Um, and I'm an optimist. I absolutely acknowledge the problems. I absolutely acknowledge the social problems, the exploitation, the burnout, the stress, the rise in depression. You see the numbers in teenage suicide. terrible things are happening, but I'm an optimist.
Mm.
Um, because at the end of the day, the solutions are also in people's hands. Let me give you a very weird example. Do you ever trade in the stock market?
I did, and I didn't do very well, and I stopped.
What's the first thing you learn about buying and selling stocks?
Ooh.
The first thing you learn about buying and selling stocks is that there's an opening time and there's a closing time. Have you ever thought about why? There isn't any reason why there should be an opening time. In fact, today you can go online and you can have bots and you can trade anywhere in the world. You can even trade out of hours. But for 100 years, there's been an opening time and a closing time. It was just so that the people trading could have some downtime and go home. It was a mutual pact not to undermine each other's lifestyle by continuing trading after 4:30, right? The stock market was a coffee shop in London where people would meet together and they'd trade. And they didn't want to go home before the next guy in case they did a trade that they'd miss out on. So the only solution to that was for everybody to agree as a group to say, okay, we are all going to stop trading.
Mm.
Back in a day when there was no, where your reputation depended on you giving your word, that was all that was needed.
Mm.
It was a mutual pact to say, we're not going to trade all night. And if you call me up and we talk over dinner about buying and selling stocks, we're not actually going to book the transaction until 9 o'clock the next day.
Mm.
Right? And that has stuck. It's still there. It's a bit like the story about the rails on the space shuttle being the width of 2 Roman horses, right? These anachronisms actually point us to what are the solutions that we're likely to need in future, which is that we need to be able to switch off.
Mm.
And corporations, again, I'm an optimist. I have seen research about employee engagement and which correlates employee welfare with productivity. In Hong Kong, sadly, you can go to an awful number of employers that just don't care. They're cynical and exploitative. But I have seen the data which shows that companies that are not cynical and exploitative are going to do better.
Mm.
So in the long run, survival of the fittest, evolution works in the corporate marketplace just as it does everywhere else.
Mm.
So I see things improving, but the pendulum swings.
Your example of the stock market just inspire thought in me. I don't know why, but it's almost like with life, right? You make bets, and sometimes your bets are right, sometimes your bets are wrong.
The key is to learn from the bets. Why did you make the bet?
Yeah,
Have a written goal. Did you achieve the goal?
yeah,
And be honest with yourself when you didn't.
yeah. And also having that consistency and having strong characters and disciplines will ensure you make more right bets than bad bets.
Well, sometimes you have to recognize what are the right bets that you're making,
Mm,
and then to align yourself with that path.
no
And
shortcuts.
take off the label which says I should be maybe an entrepreneur, or I should be a coach, or I should be a personal trainer.
Mm,
Maybe there's something else which will actually give you what you want,
mm, mm,
which
mm,
is more aligned with how you already do things. And again, one of the things that we can be grateful to Harrison for pointing out, this was actually an insight that he had while I was working with him, because I remember the day he said it. All of your future successes are built on abilities that you've already achieved,
mm,
right? The reason that was an important insight is that up until that point, we were devising coaching methodologies which were about strengthening weakness. And his central insight, he said, this is stupid. You shouldn't be strengthening a weakness. Don't try using weaknesses. What you really want to do is figure out how you actually do things today,
mm,
figure out what all your strengths are and continue using those, and then use those strengths to develop new strengths.
mm,
Then
mm.
your weaknesses don't matter.
Yeah. Or up that threshold
Keep
incrementally,
going up incrementally, correct.
right? I
Growth is incremental.
I like to see weaknesses as you don't need to be good at everything, right? It's normal to have things that you're great at and things that you're not as good at. But I think in order to advance, you need to bring the things that you're not good at to a minimal threshold level.
One of the things that I sometimes say in workshops is that there's no such thing as a weakness.
Hmm.
And usually somebody in the audience says, he's a shell. And he
Yeah,
asked me
yeah,
the
yeah.
question, what do you mean there are no
Uh,
weaknesses? Justify it, John. And here's the point. Weaknesses only exist relative to a challenge. If I ask you to lift up a piano, you probably can't. I probably can, right? That doesn't mean that you're weak. It just means that the challenge was too strong, right? There are other things where you have strengths which are unique to you. So the best way to look at it as a strength which is not sufficient for that challenge. And I like to change that perception, because then the solutions that you look for are different. And the solutions that you look for with that perspective are more effective than the solutions that you look for when you think, oh, I've got to muscle through and figure this out, and I've got to do this the hard way. Sometimes the easy way is the best way. And you know, that's something I use in my strength coaching, is I guide people to recognize when they put their body into a position that made the weight feel easier. Because when it feels easier, it means they were stronger. So weakness is only useful in a relative sense. If you take away all challenges, there are no weaknesses. If you take away all challenges, if there's no Doc Ock, if there's no penguin, if there's no villain, there are also no strengths, but there are potential strengths.
I love it. A question you want to ask the next guest?
Let's start with an easy question, because so much of what it is to be human is about sharing experience authentically. So I'm open to listen to anyone saying what is their most uplifting experience, because whether it's relevant to me or not, I'm going to learn something about it. And it's something I file away. And as a coach, my greatest privilege is to help people discover their solutions to their problems, because guess what? I just picked up a new solution which I can use, right? And if they have a strength which I don't have, I'm quizzing them about it. How do you do this? Now I know how to do that for myself. So often by giving and helping other people, you help yourself.
Yeah, it humbles you.
Ways. No, you literally help yourself.
Yeah.
I'm being greedy here. I'm filling my toolkit. This is all the strategies and all the experience and the knowledge and the numbers and the proof. So I would definitely ask every guest, which is I will ask everybody, is, you know, what have you achieved? What inspires you? What are you drawn to now? Because that's a personal question about them. But I think behind it, in the context of this discussion, is what would I want to work on for myself? Because everyone we meet is potentially a coach. Everyone we meet is, however successful we are, the next person we meet may have the answer to the biggest problem that we're currently facing. So the next person I would want to ask is, what's your experience of helping a scared person to reorient so that they're not scared anymore, and that they're able to achieve the goals and the wants for themselves? And I think that's crucially important, because one of the downsides of a more connected world is we're not just sharing knowledge, we're also sharing exploitation and unfairness. And I see that in people who are scared, people who are anxious about the future, people who are making choices based on fear, suspicion, and sometimes anger. And we never make good choices when we're in a negative space. So my question is, okay, what can you teach us about how to communicate with those people so that they find their dynamo?
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on, John. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, Aaron.
Hope you enjoyed
Real
too.
pleasure. It's been very thought-provoking. As you saw, you got a long silence out of me there.
Love it. Thank you, mate.